My boss stole my work and fired me. So I took his entire company. I never expected loyalty from corporate life. I wasn't naive, but I did expect fairness. For 6 years, I had given everything to the company. Long nights, weekends, missed holidays, whatever it took. I wasn't just another employee. I was the one who fixed problems no one else could. The one who came up with strategies that took the company to the next level. And my boss, Richard, knew it. Richard was the kind of CEO who thrived on image. He had the charm, the expensive suits, the fake smile that could convince anyone he cared about more than just numbers on a balance sheet. People worshipped him, colleagues, investors, even the media. He had a reputation as a visionary. But behind closed doors, he was nothing without people like me. I built the systems that made the company run smoothly. I designed the marketing campaigns that brought in high-value clients. When the company was on the verge of losing a major contract, I was the one who figured out how to keep it. But Richard didn't like sharing credit. Every time I succeeded, it was because of his leadership. Every idea I pitched became his idea the moment it reached the boardroom. I tolerated it at first, thinking that eventually my work would speak for itself, that people would recognize where the real value came from. Then came the biggest project of my career. The company had been struggling with a massive problem, one that could either ruin us or launch us into a new level of success. A competitor was eating into our market share, and we were hemorrhaging clients. The executive team was scrambling for solutions, but nothing was working. I spent months analyzing data, researching industry shifts, and coming up with a strategy that would not only save the company, but completely dominate our competition. It was the most brilliant, high-risk, high-reward plan I had ever developed. I worked tirelessly to refine it. I ran the numbers over and over again. I built the presentation, polished the pitch, and personally prepared Richard for the biggest meeting of the company's history. I should have seen it coming. The morning of the presentation, Richard pulled me aside in his office. "This is a great plan," he said, nodding at the documents on his desk. "It's exactly what we need." I smiled, relieved that he finally acknowledged my work. "Thanks. I think if we—" "But I need to make one change," he interrupted. I frowned. "What kind of change?" Richard leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly like this was difficult for him. "I need you to take a step back from the presentation." My stomach dropped. "What?" "It's nothing personal," he said, waving his hand like it was a minor detail. "But the board responds better to me leading these pitches. You understand?" No, I didn't understand. This was my work, my plan, the one I had sacrificed months of my life developing. I should have fought harder in that moment. I should have argued, demanded to be in that room. But Richard had a way of making you feel like resistance was pointless. I told myself that it didn't matter who presented the idea. As long as it worked, the company would thrive, and I'd be recognized eventually. So I nodded. All right, that was my mistake. I watched from the sidelines as Richard took my work, my vision, and presented it as his own. I saw the excitement in the investors' eyes, the way the board nodded in approval, and when the deal was signed, Richard took all the credit. He called a company-wide meeting to announce our new direction. He stood at the podium, smiling like a king addressing his subjects, and said, "This success is all because of my leadership. This strategy is the future, and it's only the beginning." My name was never mentioned. Not once. I was furious. But what came next was worse. 3 days after the deal was finalized, I was called into HR. At first, I thought it was about a promotion. I had done everything right. The company was now positioned for record-breaking success, and I had built the foundation for it. But the moment I walked into the HR office and saw the cold expression on the woman's face, I knew something was wrong. I barely heard the scripted speech. Something about restructuring and downsizing. It was only when she slid the papers across the table that I fully registered what was happening. I was being fired. I looked at her, stunned. Is this a joke? She didn't flinch. I'm afraid not. This doesn't make sense. I stopped, my heart pounding as realization hit me. This is Richard, isn't it? She sighed. I can't speak on that. Of course she couldn't. But I knew. Richard had used me. He had taken my work, built his empire on my ideas, and then gotten rid of me before I could take any of the glory. "Security will escort you out," she said, already moving on to the next form. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march into Richard's office, flip his expensive desk, and demand answers. But I didn't, because in that moment, I knew something Richard didn't. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another disposable employee, someone he could erase without consequence. But he had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't going to fight him. I wasn't going to beg for my job back. I was going to take everything from him. The secret plan begins. The humiliation of that day burned into my memory like a scar. I didn't just lose my job. I lost my reputation, my network, my future. Richard had ensured that I was blacklisted. Within days of my firing, I started reaching out to my contacts, former colleagues, industry leaders, even minor connections I had built over the years. Some didn't answer. Others gave carefully worded excuses. I'd love to help, but you know how the industry is. It's just, with Richard in charge, it's complicated. Look, I can't get involved, okay? I'm sorry. The message was clear. Richard had shut every door before I could even knock. But I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make my own doors. And when I did, Richard wouldn't be able to close them. Rock bottom and the first break. The first few months were brutal. I went from a six-figure salary to barely scraping by. Rent became a nightmare. The savings I had, gone within weeks. I watched as Richard and the company thrived off my work. Everywhere I turned, there were headlines about his genius. CEO Richard Thompson saves company with bold new strategy. Under Thompson's leadership, company sees record growth. Exclusive, the man behind the greatest corporate turnaround of the decade. Every article, every interview, every lie, and I sat in my one-bedroom apartment, staring at eviction notices, knowing that it should have been me. I didn't sleep much in those days. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smug face, the way he smiled at that podium, taking credit for what I built. I wanted revenge. But revenge isn't just about wanting it. It's about executing it. And my first break came in the form of an unexpected ally. A dangerous opportunity. One night, as I was scrolling through job listings I'd never get, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was another rejection call. But when I answered, the voice on the other end made me sit up straight. "Ethan, it's Anthony. We need to talk." Anthony was one of the top executives at my old company. He had been around long before Richard ever set foot in that office. Unlike most of the leadership, Anthony actually respected hard work. If he was calling me, it meant something was wrong. I met him the next day at a small cafe outside the city, far away from any corporate ears that might be listening. He looked exhausted, stressed. "How bad is it?" I asked. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Bad." Richard had gambled everything on my strategy. It worked at first, but without me there to adjust and refine the process, problems were already forming. "They're trying to patch holes without knowing where the leaks are," Anthony said. "Richard is pretending he has everything under control, but he's in over his head." I leaned forward. "Then why hasn't the board figured it out?" "Because they don't see the cracks yet. The numbers still look good on paper, but internally, it's chaos." I hid my satisfaction behind my coffee cup. "So why are you telling me this?" Anthony hesitated. "Because I know what he did to you. And because, if I'm being honest, I don't want to be on a sinking ship when it finally goes down." He leaned in. "I'll help you, but only if you help me get out before it collapses." I considered the offer. Anthony wasn't just another executive. He knew the company's inner workings better than anyone. If I wanted to destroy Richard, I needed someone like him. And he needed me just as much as I needed him. Deal. We shook hands. And just like that, the first piece of my revenge was in place. Stealing his future one client at a time. Richard had built his empire on my work. So I was going to take it apart, one piece at a time. Anthony provided me with a list of the company's biggest clients. The ones who generated the majority of their revenue. They were happy now. But Anthony made it clear, Richard's arrogance was starting to show. He was cutting costs in the wrong places, ignoring client concerns, making mistakes. All I had to do was give them a better option. So I got to work. I took everything I knew about the company's weaknesses and used it to build something better. I created a brand, one that positioned itself as the real solution for high-value clients. I hired a small team, people I trusted, people who had left the company because of Richard's mismanagement. I designed a pitch that would tear Richard's company apart. And then, I waited. Because Richard's downfall wasn't going to come from me attacking him. It was going to come from his own clients walking away. The first client falls. It took 3 months before I got my first major win. One of Richard's biggest clients, A company that had been loyal for years agreed to meet with me. They were cautious at first, suspicious. They had a contract with Richard's company, and breaking it wouldn't be easy. But I knew something Richard didn't. They were frustrated. They had been dealing with issues for months, unanswered complaints, price hikes, a general lack of care. I didn't beg for their business. I didn't trash Richard. I simply showed them a better way. And when I walked out of that meeting, I had secured a contract worth millions. When Richard found out, he didn't panic. Not yet. He thought it was a fluke. One lost client? Not a big deal. He probably told himself, "We'll recover." But what he didn't know? That was only the beginning. The silent takeover. Richard had spent his entire career winning by default. He wasn't smart. He wasn't innovative. He didn't outwork people. He simply took credit for the work of others and used corporate politics to maintain power. But here's the thing about people like him. They don't know how to handle real competition. For years, he had surrounded himself with yes men, people too afraid to challenge him. He had gotten comfortable with success handed to him on a silver platter. He had never had to fight to keep what he stole. Until now, because one by one, I was dismantling everything he built, and he didn't even realize it. The clients start to walk away. After landing my first major client, I knew I had momentum. One success wasn't enough. I needed to repeat it. I studied the weak points in Richard's company, looking for clients who were unhappy but hadn't left yet. They were the ones who would be the easiest to turn. Anthony, my insider, gave me everything I needed: internal reports, client complaints, financial struggles Richard had been hiding from the board. I saw a pattern. Richard had been trying to cut costs to make his success seem even bigger. He was outsourcing work to cheaper vendors, increasing fees, and stretching his employees thin. It looked good on the surface, profits were still up. But below that, there were cracks, and all I had to do was widen them. The second client I stole was easier than the first. I reached out, scheduled a meeting, and let them talk. They were already frustrated. Their costs had gone up. Their support had gone down. They felt like they were paying more for less. I didn't even need to push hard. I just had to show them that I was different. I gave them better pricing. I offered them real customer service. I promised them something Richard never could: actual long-term success. And just like that, they walked away from him and into my hands. Richard starts to notice. The first lost client, he ignored it. The second, he started asking questions. The third, now he was panicking. I heard from Anthony that Richard called an emergency meeting, demanding to know why clients were leaving. At first, he blamed his sales team. "You're not pushing hard enough. You're letting competitors steal from us. We need to raise our rates to make up for the losses." That last one, a critical mistake, because the moment he started charging his remaining clients more, he was practically handing them over to me. Within 6 months, I had taken 6 of his biggest accounts. The revenue loss was massive. His board started asking serious questions. But Richard? He still didn't know it was me. He thought some random startup was picking apart his business. He had no idea that the man he fired was orchestrating his downfall. The internal collapse begins. As more clients left, Richard did exactly what I expected. He doubled down on arrogance. Instead of fixing the internal problems, he tightened control, pushing employees harder, cutting more costs, ignoring warnings from his own leadership. I heard from Anthony that morale was at an all-time low. Employees were overworked, underpaid, and sick of Richard's attitude. And when employees feel like they have no future in a company, they start looking for a way out. So I gave them one. I reached out to key people, the ones who were most valuable but felt the most trapped. I made them an offer. "You know how things are going over there. It's only getting worse. But if you leave now, I'll give you a seat at something better." And one by one, they left. Not all at once. I was careful. I took them gradually, making sure Richard didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. By the time he noticed, his company was bleeding out from the inside. The moment he realized it was me, it took him 8 months to finally put the pieces together. 8 months of losing clients, losing employees, losing control. And then, I got the phone call. Unknown number. I answered. "Ethan." His voice was sharp, cold, but underneath it, I heard the panic. "I have to admit, you had me fooled." I leaned back in my chair, smiling. "Oh, what do you mean?" He scoffed. "Don't play dumb. I know it's you." I stayed silent. "You think you're clever, huh? Poaching my clients, stealing my people. You think this is funny?" I let the silence stretch, then finally said, "I think it's justice." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, a low chuckle. "You don't have what it takes to beat me." Oh, there it was. The classic Richard move. When he couldn't control someone, he tried to break them mentally. But I wasn't the same person he fired a year ago. I wasn't scared anymore. "You're already losing," I said simply. "And you know it." "I'll recover." "No," I said. "You won't." And then, for the first time, he had no response. The final stages of destruction. Richard wasn't done fighting. After that call, he tried to retaliate. He launched aggressive marketing campaigns, trying to win clients back. He offered deep discounts, hoping to stop the bleeding. He tried to lure back employees, promising better salaries. But none of it worked, because Richard didn't understand the real problem. The problem wasn't money. The problem was him. He had spent years burning bridges. And now, no one wanted to work with him. By the end of the year, his company was in full-blown crisis mode. The board was furious. The investors were losing confidence. The losses were too big to hide. And I was waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. The moment he realizes I took everything. Richard wasn't an idiot. He was arrogant, ruthless, and short-sighted, but he wasn't an idiot. He knew something was wrong. His company was bleeding money. Clients were leaving faster than they could be replaced. Employees were jumping ship. And yet, he still thought he could fix it. He still believed that he was untouchable. That was the best part. Because Richard didn't know that I wasn't done yet. The board starts to lose confidence. For years, Richard had the board wrapped around his finger. They loved him because he made them money. He knew how to sell them a vision, how to spin every failure into a temporary setback and every success into proof of his genius. But now, the numbers weren't lying anymore. The company's revenue had dropped by over 40% in a year. The stock price had taken a hit. Shareholders were asking questions. And for the first time, the board wasn't buying his excuses. Anthony, my inside man, kept feeding me updates. Richard is getting desperate. The board is demanding answers. He's blaming everyone but himself. They've scheduled an emergency meeting next week. If he doesn't turn things around, they might start looking for a replacement. That was my cue. Because if Richard was finally feeling the pressure, it was time to turn it up, destroying his last remaining supporters. Richard still had a few allies left, people who had been loyal to him because they had benefited from his success, executives who had been rewarded for looking the other way, investors who had profited from his cutthroat decisions. They weren't loyal to Richard. They were loyal to the money he brought them. So I made sure they started losing money too. I had already stolen his biggest clients. Now, I targeted the smaller ones, the ones who weren't big enough to make headlines but still contributed to the company's survival. I personally reached out to every dissatisfied client I could find. I offered them better deals, better service, better results. And one by one, they left. At first, Richard refused to acknowledge it. "We can afford to lose a few small clients," he told the board. "It's just a temporary setback." Then the losses became too big to ignore. His financial backers started pulling out. His last remaining allies started questioning their investments. The people who had once worshipped him started turning on him. His public breakdown. The next time I saw Richard, it wasn't in person. It was on a live-streamed earnings call. He was supposed to calm the investors, reassure the board, and present a plan to fix the damage. Instead, he cracked. I watched as he tried to explain the losses, his voice just a little too tense, his smile just a little too forced. "We are implementing a strategic restructuring to ensure long-term growth." Lies. Our clients remain confident in our ability to deliver top-tier services. More lies. Then came the questions. "Mr. Thompson, why has client retention dropped so drastically?" "Mr. Thompson, why are key employees leaving at such a high rate?" "Mr. Thompson, is it true that your competitors, specifically the firm founded by Ethan Carter, are directly responsible for these losses?" That was the moment I had been waiting for. His expression changed. The confidence cracked for just a second. And in that moment, everyone saw it. Everyone saw that Richard was afraid. He tried to recover. "These claims are exaggerated. We remain the market leader, and no small competitor will change that." But the damage was done. Because now, everyone knew my name. The first time he said my name in years. That night, I got a text from an unknown number. "You really think you've won?" I smirked. Because for the first time in over a year, Richard was acknowledging me. Not as some irrelevant ex-employee, not as someone he could erase, but as his biggest threat. I didn't reply, because I didn't need to. The next day, the board called for a private review of his leadership, and I was preparing for the final move. The ultimate power move, buying his company. Richard had spent his career burning bridges. I spent my revenge building them. Over the past year, I had gained a powerful network of former employees, clients, and investors. A thriving business that was now the biggest competitor to Richard's company. The trust of people who had once worked under him. Now, I had the money, the influence, and most importantly, I had the perfect opportunity. Richard's company was in free fall. The board was looking for solutions, and I gave them one. Anthony, my inside man, helped me organize an offer. A buyout. A deal that would save the company, just not Richard. It was perfect, because not only was I taking everything Richard had built off my work, I was taking it right in front of him. The moment he realized I had won. Richard found out when the board voted him out. I wasn't there for the meeting, but Anthony was. He told me that Richard had exploded, shouting, threatening lawsuits, demanding loyalty from people who had already moved on. You can't do this to me. I built this company. I made you. No, Richard, I made you. And now, I was taking it all back. I waited until the deal was finalized before I finally called him. He answered on the first ring. His voice was hoarse, furious. What do you want? I smiled. Just checking in. How's unemployment treating you? Silence. You know, I continued, I used to think about this moment a lot. The moment you'd finally realize you lost. But now that I'm here, I don't even care anymore. Go to hell, he snapped. I laughed. You first. Then I hung up. And just like that, Richard Thompson was nothing. His last desperate attempt to survive. I knew Richard wouldn't go down quietly. Men like him never do. After being removed from his own company, he tried everything to stay relevant. He begged his remaining industry contacts for a new position. He went on interviews, spinning the same charm that once fooled everyone. He tried to start his own consulting firm, hoping to rebuild his power. But there was one problem. Nobody trusted him anymore. His name had been dragged through the mud. The investors he once relied on wanted nothing to do with him. The clients who had once respected him, they were working with me now. Everywhere he turned, he hit a wall. And I made sure those walls never came down. The final confrontation. It happened at a charity gala. A high-profile event, filled with CEOs, investors, and top executives. I wasn't even planning on going, until Anthony sent me a message. Richard will be there. I knew immediately what that meant. He was still trying, still hoping to rebuild his image. I arrived late, took my time, and when I finally walked in, I saw him. Richard was standing in a small group, fake laughing at some joke, pretending like he wasn't one of the biggest failures in the industry. He saw me instantly. Our eyes met across the room. For a second, I saw pure hatred. Then, defeat. He excused himself from the conversation and headed straight for the bar. I followed. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched as he took a long sip of whiskey, gripping the glass too tightly. What do you want, Ethan? He muttered. I smirked. Just wanted to see how you were doing. His jaw tightened. Go to hell. I chuckled. Already sent you ahead of me. Silence. Then he turned to me, eyes burning. Why? I tilted my head. Why what? Why did you do this? His voice was raw, bitter. I leaned in slightly. You fired me. He laughed, shaking his head. People get fired all the time. You could have moved on. Started fresh. But no, you had to come after me. I sipped my drink, then set it down slowly. You didn't just fire me, Richard. You stole from me. You took my work, erased my name, and made sure I couldn't get another job in the industry. You wanted me to disappear. His expression darkened. But I didn't disappear. I continued. I built something better, stronger. And now, you don't even exist in this industry anymore. Richard exhaled sharply. You think you won? I smirked. I know I did. He clenched his fists. This isn't over. I laughed. It is for you. I leaned in close. Enjoy your irrelevance. Then, without another word, I walked away. The final nail in his coffin. Richard didn't recover. His attempts at starting a new business failed. The people who once supported him never returned. And within a year, he disappeared. No LinkedIn updates. No new ventures. Just a ghost of what he once was. The last time I heard about him, he was working as a consultant for small businesses. A man who once commanded millions in salary and stock options was now begging for $500 gigs. And me? I was thriving. My company had expanded into multiple markets. My employees were treated with respect and fairness. My business was known for actual innovation, not stolen ideas. I had everything Richard tried to take from me, and more. The letter that ended it all. A few months later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name. I opened it, knowing exactly who it was from. Ethan, congratulations. You won. I hope it was worth it. I lost everything, and you got everything you wanted. But in the end, you and I both know one thing. You didn't succeed because you were better. You succeeded because I let you. Because I gave you something to fight against. Without me, you'd still be nothing. So enjoy your victory. Just remember who made you. I stared at the letter for a long moment. Then, I laughed. I crumpled it up, tossed it in the trash, and never thought about Richard Thompson again. Because he was wrong. He didn't make me. He only made me realize I didn't need him. And that was the best revenge of all. Revenge is satisfying. But at some point, you have to move on. I built something great. Not out of spite. Not out of anger. But because I was good at what I did. And unlike Richard, I never had to steal from anyone. As my company continued to grow, I focused on mentorship. Helping others who had been in my position. Making sure that talent was recognized, not stolen. Because in the end, success isn't just about taking down the people who wronged you. It's about building something that lasts. And I did. Without him, Richard thought he could erase me. He thought he could take my work, throw me away, and move on without consequences. But he forgot one thing. You can't destroy someone who refuses to stay down. And now, I'm still here. And he's nothing.
Did you like this story? Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insane real-life betrayals, revenge stories, and justice served. Check out our other videos. You won't believe some of the twists we've covered.